I think we can all agree that the 20th century was a wild time to live in for the world. The only other ones that can contest would be the 19th century, the 14th century, and the 1st century. Being alive around the time of the Son of God makes things interesting for people, it seems. But the 20th century had just about everything going on. Racism, war crimes, corruption. And yes, I recognize that every country in existence has committed some form of war crimes during this period, or any other period. However, if I made a video for every country's atrocities in the 20th century, I'd be needing 2 intermissions in between. But let me holla for $1 and I might consider it. While every nation is known for their violations of the Geneva Convention, or as some powerhouses call it, yearly checklists, you might be familiar with the actions taken during World War II by plenty of nations involved. Oh, here he goes talking about Germany. I'd respond if you had that on the get-go, but no. I don't think there's anything to talk about for Germany that people haven't either agreed upon or outright denied without proof. However, while I have you here, I just want to remind everyone what the US did to Japan because, to me, it's the equivalency of getting shot after slapping someone. On
December 7th, 1941,
the Empire of Japan had, in a weird power move, decided to attack the United States. And yes, this was retaliatory for the US cutting off oil to the House of the Rising Sun. Usually there are other non-extreme measures to take before bombing a nation that, you know, took on the world in the decades before. Hell, we even beat ourselves.
Oh, way down south in the land of traitors, rattlesnakes and alligators, right away, come away, right away.
Fun fact, the Axis power were doing well enough on their own front for the most part, so when Japan attacked the US, Germany's response was equivalent to this scene.
You what?
You asked for a couple of ice cubes in your drink, and I only put in one!
You what?
Anyways, tale as old as time as the US, after following isolationism for the first part of the war, decided that
Now, it's my problem.
and started to help the Allied forces more directly in 1941. Years pass, Germany is defeated, and Japan is the last one left standing. Italy had realized it wasn't built for this early on, and Germany had a mind-blowing realization that they too weren't built for it. Japan stubbornly fought on against the United States in the Pacific and islands across the region, but regardless, things weren't looking good for Japan, who was now a one-man army. Now we can argue if Japan was going to surrender due to lack of militaristic goods, or would have persevered if the morale of the Japanese continued. I can't say, hypotheticals aren't a thing to consider when dealing with historical facts. Facts, such as the United States decided to try this one new trick that the nations don't want you to know about. On August 6, 1945 in Hiroshima and on August 9, 1945 in Nagasaki, the United States dropped the father and son on those two cities and brought to the world nuclear bombs. And I also want to add to how funny is it that not even given a week to think about it, the United States had already pretty much said, we already got the second one ready. We gotta use it on someone, and Germany just surrendered and Italy's doing their own thing, and we're not gonna go with the Russian one yet. We gotta drop it somewhere. And ever since, we've all been living in dread of nuclear annihilation. Thanks for watching. If you remember what I said about a minute ago, I said what the United States did to Japan was equivalent to stabbing someone after getting slapped. And I will stand by that.
I mean it! I mean it! Well, I told you to stop.
I tickle you? You hit me in the head with a frying pan?
The United States dropped the sun twice on Japan. The country is still dealing with the long-term effects of radiation in their water, their genes, and their land, and while the whole country obviously isn't impacted, the lasting results of the nuclear bombs remains a scar on the nation. So how exactly did the United States and Japan become buddy-buddy with each other? Well, like all of history, it's multiple factors. But if I told you about every little thing, I start sounding mad with the rambling of how a sip of British tea led to Japan becoming a global powerhouse. But the first step towards the newly found relationship between the US and Japan was the treaty signed between the nations. The US and Japan officially ended the war on September 2nd, 1945, when Japanese representatives signed a document of surrender aboard the USS Missouri. I know people celebrated on August 12, 1945 as the official surrender date, but that's just Americans getting cocky. However, there wasn't really an alliance immediately after, but a military occupation led by General MacArthur to reconstruct Japan from the ground up. Oh, the United States found it necessary to right their wrongs with Japan and help them assist in rebuilding. Oh, my sweet summer child. The goal of American occupation in Japan was to rebuild, but to do away with Japanese customs for the most part. While the US can't just conquer a nation or territory anymore, yes, I see you, Guam, be patient, there's nothing to say they can't be involved with other nations. A little coup as a treat. But this wasn't a coup in your traditional sense like you see in Chile, but basically a subversion of Japanese traditions in favor of United States. See, the US hated Japan for years after the war, partly due to the conflict, mostly due to the racism. Shut it, I know it sounds like woke, but given US soldiers treated most Japanese with disdain, it's racism. The United States wasn't so much doing this for the love of a nation, but because the United States and the world were entering a new conflict, the Cold War. While it can be argued the Cold War continues to this day due to the tense atmosphere across the globe, it's popularly believed that the Cold War ended with the dissolvement of the USSR and the fall of the Berlin Wall. Mr. Gorbachev, please tear down that wall. If you allow me to be casual for this, I just gotta say, it's pretty insulting to say this period wasn't directly confrontational. Given the various proxy wars, the coups, the espionage, the Bay of Pigs, I just find it funny to say this period wasn't as violent as actual wars when there were actual wars going on in this time. The Cold War saw opportunities for alliances and fronts to be created as a challenge to the opposing side. On one side, you have the capitalist ideologies held by the United States.
Almighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, this day is set upon the mighty devil.
And on the other side, you got the communist ideology held by the Soviet Union.
Take the charge. Look at my passion ball. Take the charge. I'm standing next to motherfucker. Look at my passion ball.
Damn, both go hard. But no matter how hard an edit is made, it's harder to get allies, especially when you both are among the most hated in the world. So US involvement was with selfish intent to mold Japan in the former's image and have adopted an ideal more closely to the United States. And it's not like the Japanese had much of a say in the matter either, regardless of what the US had done, because Japan was as hated in the East as the United States was hated in everywhere. See, during the Second World War and the decades leading up to that war, the Japanese were adventurous, to say the least. But in about the same way the Brits and the Spanish were explorers during the 15th century. The Japanese had decided to go beyond their shores and into other territories that were already held by other sovereign states. However, Japan didn't really hear no bell and decided to continue the fight for expansion in various Asian countries. Japan controlled the Koreas, Japan owned bits of China, Japan owned bits of Russia, Japan owned bits of Indonesia. Honestly, Japan was like the British Empire for the time because they owned a lot of territory outside of their own domain. Fitting, since both are known for their suns never setting. Except now, scoreboard, baby!
What the fuck is a kilometer?
Though surprisingly, it's not that the Japanese controlled these territories that made inhabitants upset, primarily, but it's what was done in these territories that made them enraged. What was done was how scientists found out how much water was in the human body, and that was thanks to society has a tendency to be the worst whenever power is had. Remember kids, everyone is bad. Yes, even the Belgians. And Japan was no exception. Unit 731 was a Japanese military group that used human experimentation to conduct research about human anatomy. If you are unfamiliar with Unit 731, you're probably thinking the Japanese experiment on the human body after death. And you'd be partially right, unfortunately. Outside of the mainland, Japan used citizens from controlled territories to conduct live research about the human body and find out what one can endure. Graphic details coming up because no way I can show you the imagery without Big Red there throwing the hammer at me. From the 1930s to the end of the Second World War, Japan established a camp in Manchuria that conducted these experiments on civilians. Though you're also probably wondering to yourself now, doesn't the Geneva Convention forbid these sort of things? And you'd be right, but if I'm being frank, when has a world power ever followed the rules or faced repercussions? Back to the human rights violations performed, Japan conducted a number of experiments on the human body to see the limitations a person can reach before death. Alright YouTube, this is for educational and research purposes only, and I'm not showing anything at all. Please, let this video stay up. For those not wanting to see or hear this sort of thing, skip to this timestamp for a brief but nondescript recap. In strive for research, as the scientists like to claim, Unit 731 did the following to civilians. Find out how much water was in the human body by burning subjects alive. Find out when hypothermia sets in by freezing subjects alive. Find out how certain organs look while pumping by vivisecting subjects without anesthesia. Saw how bayonets, flamethrowers, and special bullets impacted the human body with and without cover. Injected various disease into a person at the same time. Committed sexual assault to research pregnancy and the impact of physical pressure on the human body via weight. Alright, this could be the time skip right here. So, welcome back. And I just know some weeaboos are clenching their fists in anger right now and thinking, not my Japan. Regardless of your feelings, Japan was like every world power and did not care for citizens. Oh boy, here goes Optics with his conspiracies. Hey, you find me a nation that actually takes care of all its citizens across history, then I'll shut it. Until then, we gotta recognize that Japan committed these vile acts because the Japanese sure as hell never will. But what does this have to do with this newly found alliance between the US and Japan? Well, like we deduced, the United States needed allies and resources for the Cold War, and to make themselves look like the big dog on the stage. And with the new knowledge acquired by Unit 731, the United States offered amnesty, support, and complete erasure of the crimes committed by the Japanese during World War II in exchange for cooperation by the Japanese government. Like that, the horrid alliance between the United States and Japan became more solidified between these two former enemies, and what led the two to become great friends in this day and age. To this day, Japan denies what actions were taken during the war, a page out of the book written by, well, most nations, though, for the sake of this video, we'll just say the US playbook. But I'm not here to give my opinion on each nation to ever exist. As a historian, I'm here to just give you insight on the past and understand how the world we live in was morphed by the actions of the past. The nuclear bombing of Japan are still a hot topic issue to this day among citizens between nations. One side thinks the nukes created more harm in the long run, the other believes the nukes were necessary to stop the resilience of Japanese forces. Regardless, to the two nations, neither the nukes nor the human experimentations seem to be important when there are ways the government can benefit from each other. Anyways, thanks for stopping on by. I know this topic might be a bit of a hot one because of the content, but hey, history is about research and discussion. So feel free to keep it civil and comment, question, or add other tidbit that I might have missed. Be sure to hit that subscribe, give a like, and check out the other social media accounts that I have got going. Until next time, remember that history is made every day, so you decide what you make of it. Take care.